Let's talk about camera brands. You probably know that I'm looking for a new camera for my video work. And of course, because of that, I've been looking into different camera brands. And I thought it would be interesting to tell you what I see and how I feel about the different camera brands. And, some things, because I've used most of them in my photographic career. And some of the stuff that I have might be a bit stereotypical, but let's talk about camera brands. Hi, it's Peter here, and let's get right into the business. We don't need a disclaimer this time. Every camera brand makes excellent cameras, no doubt about that. You can find from any camera brand, you can find a suitable camera for your needs. Most likely. Of course, you might prefer something else over something else, and that's totally fine. And you might have some history with different brands and you feel good about different brands. You might have some nostalgic feelings, and all of those are totally fine, as long as you are happy with your choice. And also, what might affect your feelings about camera brands are certain photographers that use a certain brand. You might like their work and want to work with the same type of camera. And again, nothing wrong with that. Totally fine, as long as you are happy with your choice. But one thing I have to say is that don't be defined as a photographer through a camera brand. You want to be judged by your work, the photographs. The camera is only a tool. And as I said in the beginning, no matter what camera you use, you can find or what brand you use, you can find a good camera for your needs from any of the brands that's available. But let's start with alphabetical order. So the first one is Canon. I've used Canon quite a bit. Early 90s all the way up to 2014. So the longest time any brand I've used is Canon in my career. The reason I chose Canon back in the early 90s was the AF. And I will talk about the brand that I used before that a bit later in this video. And how I see the Canon back then, it was the younger generation bought Canons and the older generation used Nikons. And also in the early 90s, the younger generation used Fujifilm as their film stock, and the older people used Kodak. So it was like the older generation back then was Nikon and Kodak, and the younger generation was Canon and Fuji. That was kind of like a rough thing. As I said, these are a bit stereotypes and general average idea. Of course, there were a lot of mixes, but that was the impression that I had. And also today, I see Canon as a slightly old-fashioned camera brand. And I'm not saying that it is a bad camera brand. It's really a good camera brand which has models for everyone. And especially in the 2010 to 2015, when there was a really big boost of, or maybe even earlier, 2008 to 2015, there was a real huge amount of DSLR sold, and Canon was the king of the hill at that time. It was a thing to have a Canon DSLR, that was the big thing. And of course that kind of like heydays of Canon has gone, because now the same people that bought the DSLRs, the entry-level DSLRs, use the smartphones. Canon is, to me, slightly boring, because it's a good tool that you get your jobs done. In that sense, it's really good, but it feels a bit old-fashioned. And when they switched to mirrorless, that was quite late, and I think they've lost a lot of photographers to Sony on that time. And that kind of makes the impression that they are older people using that, because they stick with the DSLRs, and the younger generation went with mirrorless cameras. And then there is Fuji. Fuji has taken the retro look and has a bit different type of sensors, and also have taken a little bit different path. They don't have a full frame camera. They have APS-C and then medium format. So it's a totally different approach, and I think it's a pretty wise approach, and the retro look kind of like appeals to many. And it is very popular brand with street photographers. So they've kind of like taken that, and I think that is quite wise move for them, that they have kind of targeted that niche. And the cameras are really great for that. They also have a lineup of rangefinder cameras, quite a few. I think the X Pro series, which is hasn't been updated for many years, and the XA4 and then the X100 cameras. They all quite popular, especially the X100 cameras, because they are really good for street photography. And if you're interested in, I tested the X100V a few years ago, and there is the video if you're interested in that. It was a great camera with some things that I wasn't really happy with, but as a whole it is a great camera. And I also have a Fuji camera. It's the X10, which I bought in 2011, I think December it was. And it was a big failure, and that was the second time I bought something that I didn't really like. But maybe I'll give it another try and make a video about it and try it as a street photography camera, because it has a lot of potential, being so small and having some interesting features too. Another thing that Fuji has are the film simulations. They call them Velvia, Senzia, Astia and all that, which are the same as their film brands. And I think that's a strong point for getting a Fuji camera. And also I'm drawn slightly to those because I used to use Fuji film when I was doing film back in the day. So that is a clever thing to do, and I think Fuji is an interesting player in the market. Slightly different strategy than the others, but I think it's an interesting camera. And then Nikon, which is the brand that I have not been involved at all during the digital era. When I was working for someone else in the late 80s and early 90s, we had Nikon F3 cameras and we used those, and it was a huge camera with, at the time, good features and great lenses, and it was a workhorse. It was a brick. But you know, my personal camera was Pentax at the time, so, and Canon, and so after I started freelancing in 1994, I don't even know if I have even touched the Nikon camera. Maybe in a Photokina fair or some other venues where there have been displayed cameras. So Nikon is kind of like a empty page on my photographic career after 94. And also the user that I feel is using Nikon now is from the slightly older generation. Maybe, I don't know if that's true, but that's my impression. If there is anything that you disagree with me, please let me know in the comments down below. And then OM System / Olympus. And that's a camera also for the older generation that want to have a smaller and lighter gear when they go out into the woods photographing wildlife, birds and stuff like that. That's the impression. And that is some group also that OM System or OMDS is targeting right now. And I think it's a clever way of doing a slightly different, not trying to sell cameras to everyone, because you know it might not be the best option for everyone, but for that niche I think is one of the best options if we consider the whole system and the price range too. Olympus tried to take a piece of street photographers, but Pen F, in my knowledge, what I've heard, it didn't sell as much as they wished it would. And it would be interesting, which I have no knowledge about, if they are going to make the Pen F Mark II. I think that could be an interesting thing, because the rangefinder style is quite good for street photography, and if they had all the newest features and the newest AF on that, so like make a OM5 in a form of a Pen F, I think that would be a great camera. I would be interested in that if that happens. And then we talk about Panasonic, which is known for its great hybrid cameras and video-centric cameras. Not really sure who is the person that I have in mind that uses Panasonic camera. Maybe it's a slightly same that Olympus was before they targeted the wildlife and outdoor photographer with their OM1 camera, for example. But it has been a very popular camera, Panasonic I mean, in video production companies with their young people. Of course, it's been quite competitive in prices, and the quality is really good, and they have really put some good features in their video cameras. That was a video camera that I bought, GH4, back in 2014 when I switched from Canon to Olympus cameras. But at the time, Olympus did not have very good video features. They came later with EM1 Mark II. Until EM1 Mark II was launched, I used GH4 as my main video camera. And I still have it somewhere. I don't know where it is right now. I might have packed it away. But anyways, and Panasonic is an interesting company because they made the first mirrorless camera for mass production, even though the first mirrorless camera is considered to be the Epson RD1, which was an interesting, kind of like a Leica Voigtlander copy. And it was an interesting camera that's discontinued many years ago. But I think it still is one of the most interesting cameras that was made way back. They do have some rangefinders, Panasonic I mean. The LX cameras, if I remember the correct, and those could be really good point and shoot rangefinder style cameras for street photographers and for travel photographers. But for some reason, they're not that popular, in my opinion. And lately, Panasonic has shifted their R&D towards full-frame cameras, the S5 cameras, for example, the Mark II, which is a marvelous camera. And that is going to be interesting if that will, be more popular among photographers. I know that they also have, or I'm not sure if it's in the market yet, the S5 Mark II X version, which is more video-centric, and that'd be interesting if that will replace the GH lineup for a popular camera for small production companies. That remains to be seen. Not sure about the L mount though, because there aren't really other cameras than the S cameras from Panasonic for L mount. Yes, I know there are some from Leica and from Sigma, but Leica cameras are really expensive, and then Sigma camera is kind of like an oddball. It's the most impossible camera to use. It makes great images, of course, but the whole workflow and the usability is horrible. I really don't understand what they were thinking when they made that camera. But hopefully they make something more suitable for photography in the future, so that L mount will grow, because it is, of course, an interesting thing to get a whole new mount. And then we have Pentax and Ricoh, because Pentax is owned by Ricoh, so that's why I combined them. And Pentax is an interesting brand. They have some odd cameras. They have many cameras at different colors, and they recently, just a few weeks ago, launched a monochrome camera that is, shoot black and white images. And I think it was a clever thing, because we do need some special cameras. It's a small niche, and hopefully they are successful and make some money with that camera, so that they will continue making some great cameras. I used to have Pentax. That was the camera that I bought. I think it was around 80s, maybe 80, 81, 82. I don't remember exactly. And it was a Super A, Pentax Super A, and I used that for my professional work in the late 80s before I switched to AF. And speaking of AF, my first AF camera was a Pentax SFX, and it was garbage. That was my first big mistake when buying a camera. I used it for a month and just, sold it back and got another Super A, Pentax Super A. And the reason I went with SFX first was that it could take my K-mount lenses that I had, quite a few. But as I said, it was a horrible camera, and I'm glad I sold it and got something better. And then we have another camera from Ricoh Pentax, is the GR cameras, which are quite popular among street photographers. And they have a way which I first thought that what's the point? But then I realized having two cameras, the same body, but with different lenses, built-in lenses, so they're kind of like a point-and-shoot cameras. And I could see myself using that for street photography, because it has some unique features for street photographers. But the problem with that camera is, and it's a big problem, that it doesn't have an EVF. It's only an LCD. And if I am correct, it doesn't even tilt or articulate. So it's like a fixed LCD, which is, okay, you can make it smaller, but I couldn't use that. You can get a external viewfinder for it, but then you lose the size. If they make the GR as a rangefinder style and add a a EVF, then that could be an interesting choice for street photographers. But what I like about Ricoh and Pentax is that they try to do things a bit differently, and separate them from others, not being a general camera brand, because with these products you can make some money if you can target the whole group and get enough sales. But yes, it is an interesting camera, and because I used to have Pentax for many years, I have a small sweet spot for them. So I really hope that they will make it. And then we have Sony. Many brands that I've mentioned, I've said that they are for older people, but I feel that Sony is for younger people. It's for the PlayStation generation. And it is still, I consider it to be kind of like a new player. It's been around for quite some time now, but honestly, I think it was about 10-12 years ago when they introduced A7, and after that they've taken a really big part of the market, and especially I think that Canon lost a lot of users to Sony at the beginning. Now I think they might be going back and forth because Canon has kind of like catched up the others with their R series mirrorless cameras. And I think Sony has one advantage is it's been growing, so it's been kind of like the heydays and the buzzword. Do you have Sony? And when I told that I'm getting a new camera for my video work, most of you predicted that it will be a Sony. And I don't know yet what it's going to be. Sony is of course one option because it is a good camera and it is used by younger generation, and that of course generates that many think that if I get a Sony because everybody else has a Sony, it's a good reason if you really like the camera, but it's not a good reason if you just think because someone else has something you need the same. It's sad, I think, to kind of like follow because of that. But yes, like I said, Sony has done really some good stuff, and they have also quite a variety of different cameras for different type of photographers. And they are also the only camera brand that has really tried to make a good vlogging camera. They're quite close with it, but it's not perfect yet, and that is something that I've wondered many years, that how come no camera brand has really taken seriously vloggers and content creators. They've added some stuff, but still it's not there. What they should do is just to take some of the most popular content creators that making blogs and YouTube videos, TikToks, whatever, to a round table and ask what they want, what they need. I don't know if they've done that, but if they have, it doesn't show, in my opinion. There are so many small things that makes most of the vlogging cameras that they have made a bit annoying. There's always a slight thing. They're good, but not quite there yet, like I said. And I know you probably wonder what happened to Leica and Hasselblad. Why didn't I mention them? Yeah, they are still out there, but they are such a niche and expensive cameras that I don't think it is for general audience, those cameras. And Hasselblad 500 cameras at the film days were really popular among studio photographers. I had lots and lots of colleagues who've used that. I went a bit different way. I had a Mamiya RB camera because for two reasons. The 6x7 format was better for me, and then it had the bellow focusing system. So all my lenses could focus really close. So I didn't need to have a expensive macro lens for any work. All my lenses were kind of like macro lenses. And that was the reason that I had Mamiya 6.7 instead of Hasselblad. Leica cameras I never had. I do have one in back there. It's a Leica CL. It's my wife's grandfather's camera, but I've never really used it. I've just, it's in safe place here. Remember what I said at the beginning. Don't be defined as a photographer by what camera brand you're using. Try to be defined as a photographer through your photographs. That's the most important thing. And as I said, these things were not facts. They were my impressions of different camera brands. So don't be offended if you're someone else that I said and you still use some camera brand. I probably know what I mean. But hey, thanks for watching and bye for now.